Today, Goldman Sachs lowering its economic growth forecast again. What's it blaming for the possible shutdown? El Salvador becomes the first country to adopt Bitcoin as legal money. Why does the country's president say it's a good thing, and why are some concerned? And China's Twitter suspends celebrity fan accounts. It says it wants to curb, quote, irrational star-chasing behavior and only promote rational star-chasing activities. What does that mean? That and much more, coming up at NTD Business. Good evening, great to have you with us. I'm Paul Graney. Goldman Sachs has cut its GDP forecast for the United States for the second time in a month, citing the impact of the Delta variant and fading fiscal stimulus. It's now predicting GDP for the year to come in at a 5.7%. That's down half a percentage point. Goldman also blamed a slower service sector recovery, which comes on the heels of a weak August jobs report released last week. Morgan Stanley and the Atlanta Federal Reserve also recently cutting their GDP estimates for the quarter. Still, Goldman economists predict that weaker growth this year will set the stage for a stronger rebound in 2022. They raised their forecasted GDP growth for next year from 4.3 to 4.6%. And while businesses cry out for talent to help boost their own economic output, Americans are apparently taking the opportunity to switch jobs and even ask for higher wages, according to a new survey by the New York Federal Reserve. It found 5.9% of respondents moved to a new employer in July, up from 4.4% a year ago. It also showed workers raised their expectations for how much they should be paid. The average minimum annual wage increased to nearly $60,000, down from its high this March, but still about $5,000 more than the same time last year. In other news today, the U.S. Coast Guard says it's investigating nearly 350 reports of oil spills in and along the U.S. Gulf of Mexico. It's in the wake of Hurricane Ida. Ida wreaked havoc on offshore platforms as well as onshore oil and gas processing plants. Nearly 90% of the region's offshore oil production is still shut down. The Coast Guard is conducting flyovers looking for spills. On Sunday, it found evidence of a new leak from an offshore well, but also reported that another big leak was no longer active. One local agency says companies responsible for the spills will have to clean them up. And bad news for Boeing. Europe's biggest airliner by passenger count, Ryanair, has walked out of negotiations for a new fleet of planes. Ryanair apparently drives a hard bargain and says Boeing's price just wouldn't fly. NTD's Colin Fredrickson has more.
Europe's biggest low-cost airline has ended talks with Boeing. Ryanair wanted to buy tens of billions of dollars worth of 737 MAX jets. CEO Michael O'Leary telling Reuters about it last week.
I would hope to reach an agreement with Boeing on MAX 10 pricing. Boeing need an order. You see a lot of their major customers, Southwest and others, are postponing deliveries and cancelling orders. We're certainly very keen to place a MAX 10 order, but only when the timing and the pricing is right.
But the pricing was not right. On Monday, O'Leary said, "We are disappointed we couldn't reach an agreement, and that Boeing had a more optimistic outlook on aircraft pricing than we do, and we have a disciplined track record of not paying high prices for aircraft."
It's a reflection of the pricing in the market right now. Ryanair is known to drive a very hard bargain on aircraft purchases, and they were expecting lower prices than Boeing was willing to offer.
David Noletti is a managing director at consulting firm Riveron. He says it's a buyer's market and that Ryanair is using that pricing leverage to their advantage.
Boeing is struggling. They still have several hundred undelivered MAX aircraft on their books, sitting in airports, and they're struggling to get the production rate of the aircraft back up.
Ryanair is known for buying at the cheapest prices, usually when the aviation sector is in a downturn. A Boeing spokesperson responded, "Ryanair is a long-standing partner," adding, "At the same time, we continue to be disciplined and make decisions that make sense for our customers and our company." Colin Fredrickson, NTD News.
The global chip shortage is going to get worse before it gets better. That's the message from top auto executives gathered in Munich today for the International Auto Show. Here's Volkswagen CEO saying the problem isn't going away anytime soon.
We expected that we would have a relief after summer break, which didn't happen because in Malaysia we had really quite significant problems with COVID. 3 plants were hit hard. We think that we will overcome this situation towards the end of the month, and then we should see a relief. Semiconductors will be on short supply probably for several months.
Automakers from General Motors to Toyota have had to slash output as a result of scarce supplies. Daimler said shortages could linger into 2022, even the year after that, though it did say the severity of the problem should ease off. BMW and major parts supplier Bosch both said they expected problems to continue into next year. And a literal crime ring. The US government has seized hundreds of fake Cartier jewelry that would have been worth more than $5 million if they were real. Customs and Border Protection says officers in Cincinnati, Ohio found 500 counterfeit bracelets and rings. They were in 2 shipments from China and Hong Kong. The fake jewelry was heading to residences in Florida and Mississippi before they were seized. The agency's trade experts say the shipments also contained non-counterfeit jewelry. CBP says it's seen a rapid growth of counterfeit goods because of e-commerce sites. Handbags, wallets, apparel, and jewelry are among the most likely targets. And China's exporters were unexpectedly busy in August. Data out today showed overseas shipments rose by more than a quarter year on year. That was well ahead of analysts' forecasts, also a big jump in July's figure. Economists were worried that fresh outbreaks and rising raw material prices could crimp growth, but instead exports of consumer electronics, furniture and other goods seem to have rebounded. A recent gridlock at major ports also seems to have eased, giving shippers a boost. Even so, manufacturers remain under pressure, partly due to the global shortage of computer chips. The service sector also slumped into contraction again. Joining us to discuss the latest Chinese trade data is senior analyst with FX Street, Joseph Trevisani. Joseph, pleasure to have you on the show as always. We see China's imports rising, even as in the U.S. consumer sentiment, consumer spending ticked down in August. Does this give you any kind of indication of the economic outlook globally, perhaps?
Well, I think a couple of things are going on. One is it looks like people who either manufacture or assemble in China are ordering early. They're concerned about supply line delays. They're concerned about shipping delays. So they're probably ordering for the Christmas season in the West right now. China not only serves as a manufacturing outlet, emporium, if you will, but it's also an assembly point for many things. So that's one of the reasons imports have gone up, because they're taking in more components that are then assembled and exported out. As far as the rest of the world goes and the extent of the slowdown that we're going to see, I think, from this COVID wave, you're seeing some of it here in the United States, certainly. As you noted, the consumer sentiment was lower in August than it has been at any point since the start of the pandemic, going back about 10 years to 2011. The ISM New Orders Index for services came in lower this month. That is not a good sign going forward. It had been strengthening much more than that. The Atlanta Fed GDP Now estimate for the U.S. GDP going into the third quarter has dropped down to 3.7%. That is considerably less than the 6.2, 6.3% we've had in the first and second quarters.
And lastly, I want to go back to China very quickly. Few remarks from the Communist Party there include this new phrase, common prosperity. When they started cracking down on the big tech firms, they want common prosperity in China. We have the leader there telling high-level cadres to be ready to share your wealth with the populace. You think this is just regular communist spiel, or you think they're worried about some economic unrest there?
It's interesting. I mean, anytime you start hearing about sharing the wealth out of China, I mean, just on the face of it, it's kind of an interesting proposition. It has rather uneasy echoes of the Cultural Revolution and things like that. I think they probably are concerned with the inequality, as odd as that may sound in an ostensibly socialist communist country, but I think it's very real, because the development of capitalism in China over the past generation has created huge inequalities. As we know from the West and the history in the West going back 150 years, capitalism has tendency to do that especially in times of rapid growth, which is, God knows, that's what China has seen over the past 30 years. So I think there probably is a populist concern about this in China. Historically, the rulers in Beijing, whether the emperors or the cadres and the Politburo, know where problems in Chinese politics come from. They come from populist revolutions.
And lastly, we have, I don't know if you're following it or not, we have China Evergrande, this big property developer. They just halted the trading of their bonds just yesterday. Do you feel that they were bailed out before? You think China is ready to continue bailing these out? And what are the implications for the economy to continue these massive bailouts?
You know, it's the private economy in China, not the state-run economy, not the state-run in large corporations that are often bailed out, that is supporting the rest of the economy. So it would seem logical going forward from an economic point of view that the state enterprises which are continually draining and requiring requirements are slowly phased out. However, these state-run institutions provide enormous amounts of employment. So China is in a bind if you start reducing the support for these organizations, for these corporations, for these entities, these partially state-run entities at the very least. You run the risk of throwing a lot of people out of work. And that's a big problem. That goes back to what you said earlier about China being concerned about populist movements. So it's a difficult situation for China. Logically, on economic, they need to phase these things out. They're not profitable. They're not really functioning. Politically, you have a very different situation.
Joseph Trevisani, FX Street. And Chinese dissident artist Ai Weiwei says Credit Suisse told him was closing his foundation's bank account. The bank says it's due to his so-called criminal record in China. Ai says Credit Suisse told him in June it wanted to close the account as soon as possible. Credit Suisse then declined to comment. Ai says the account was currently in the process of being closed and could only be used in a very limited manner. Ai helped design the 2008 Beijing Olympic Stadium before falling foul of the regime. Chinese Communist authorities later detained him for 81 days in 2011, but he says he's never been formally charged or even convicted of a crime. And Weibo, Chinese Twitter, just suspended 21 fan accounts for Korean pop bands. The platform says it wants to curb what it calls irrational star-chasing behavior. NTD Business Lee spoke to an expert who says that the recent clampdowns, including big tech, have one thing in common.
China's crackdown on celebrity culture is now targeting K-pop fans. Weibo, China's version of Twitter, announced that it suspended 21 fan accounts. The accounts were dedicated to various K-pop artists. Weibo says they showed irrational star-chasing behavior, something it firmly opposes. Instead, it promises to only promote rational star-chasing activities. Tang Jingyuan, a China analyst, says there are two main reasons why the regime is concerned with that.
The Chinese Communist Party is a political party that wants to control everything, including the minds of people. This is to say that what a person likes and dislikes, such normal expression of emotions, they all have to meet the needs of the party.
He says the other reason is that idolizing celebrities would inevitably dilute and weaken people's attention to the socialist ideology that the CCP promotes. A BTS fan club with over 1 million followers was the first account to be suspended. It had collected donations for a birthday gift for one of the BTS members. Later that day, Weibo announced that it would ban several other accounts as well, citing a government notice.
The CCP needs dedicated young people who are able to serve the party in any way it wants. It doesn't allow these teenagers to pursue the popular movement more than they support the party.
He says that celebrities have significant influence on China's youth, but the effect they have isn't necessarily in line with the goals of the CCP. Just days before, the Chinese National Radio and TV Administration banned what it called sissy men and other abnormal aesthetics. One of the sections want to boycott things that are overly entertaining. It explains the need to put more emphasis on things like revolutionary culture and socialist culture. Tang says that the current crackdowns in China have a common denominator.
It's to prepare for the worst-case scenario, in case there is a decoupling between China and the United States. That's to say, they're preparing to enter into the internal circulation.
Earlier, party head of the CCP Xi Jinping called for national rejuvenation, with tighter CCP control of business, education, culture, and religion. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
And stocks closed mostly lower on Wall Street today, but big gains for tech companies still nudged the Nasdaq slightly higher. The Dow fell 270 points, or 0.75%. S&P 500 lost 15 points, or 1/3%, for the Nasdaq today gaining 11 points. And starting today, people can exchange Bitcoin as legal money in El Salvador. It's the first country to adopt the cryptocurrency. NTD's Phil Zoe has the story.
El Salvador is officially the first country to recognize Bitcoin as legal money, in addition to its other reserve currency, US dollars. Its president says this will help the millions of Salvadorans save on transfer charges when sending money back home.
People who send and receive remittances know that commissions and high costs have to be paid to send them. And in the case of remittances, this will benefit those who send and receive remittances.
Salvadorans abroad, mostly in the US, sent $6 billion back home last year. That's about a fourth of the country's entire GDP. But there are skeptics.
I prefer dollars to Bitcoin because some days Bitcoin could be worth more than dollars, but on others it might be worth a lot less. To have a more stable coin, like a physical one.
Shop owner Mr. Ramirez says his daughters are in the US and they don't trust Bitcoin. They prefer to use the conventional ways even if it costs them.
My daughters don't trust Bitcoin over in the US. They've told me they aren't going to use it, even if they need to pay an extra $10 or $15 to send $100.
Crypto journalist David Gerard told NTD News the people of El Salvador should be concerned.
People are worried. The price of Bitcoin is up and down like a yo-yo, and that makes people upset because people get very worried about their money.
Many Salvadorans are protesting against using Bitcoin as legal money. They argue it will mostly benefit the banks, the government, and the rich. That's according to a recent study at a Central American university. Over 20% of Salvadorans rely on money sent home from overseas just to get by. Phil Zoe, NTD News.
And a return to socializing helped sales at fashion retailer Ted Baker during the second quarter. It says customers hit the shops in search of new clothes after months at home. Ted Baker has 560 stores and concessions, pointing to a rebound in North America and British shopping malls as consumer confidence picked up. Overall sales jumped 50% on the year, although online sales alone dropped by 25% as consumers headed back to stores. Ted Baker was forced to cut hundreds of jobs during the health crisis, and retail sales during the second quarter was still a third lower compared to pre-crisis levels. With a year-to-date rise of 45%, it looks like on course to end 2021 with an annual gain after 5 straight years of losses. And still to come this evening, you might be able to find new flight deals soon. A new report says airfares are expected to drop this fall. And Germany's International Auto Show kicks off, and even though it's mostly about electric cars, there's also a showroom for the classics, keeping gas-powered fans happy. That and more after this short break.
Secure, the true solution for your digital privacy and security. Secure is a private and secure messaging and email solution hosted in Switzerland, using military-grade encryption and Swiss privacy laws, giving you true privacy. Secure is 100% private and does not collect or sell any of your personal data. Secure's Helix technology connects you securely to our Swiss servers without the need of a VPN, guaranteeing privacy and security for all your communications. Secure Messenger doesn't require your phone number or any personal data that hackers target. Chat by Invites allows you to chat privately and securely with anyone outside of your secure network without the need for others to download Secure. Secure Send offers you a private and secure way to email anyone outside of Secure. You won't find this level of privacy or security on any other email or instant messaging application. Visit secure.com. Regain and protect your privacy today.
What does it mean to devote your life to the truth? Does it mean investigating communist subversion here in America? Does it mean exposing the deadly fentanyl crisis in the Midwest? We're spending late nights and covering deep government corruption? Does it mean persevering over 20 years, even after 4 masked men set one of our printing presses on fire last year? Because at a time when America's traditional values are under attack, it's the responsibility of righteous journalists to uphold truth and tradition.
Welcome back. Airline ticket prices are expected to drop this fall as business travel slows amid the Delta variant. That means you could have another opportunity to save, like at the beginning of the pandemic. Business Insider reports that average domestic airline prices are expected to drop by 10% this month, making the average domestic round-trip ticket come out to $260. According to travel data company Hopper, international round-trip airfare will average about $730. Most flyers will also not have to deal with different state travel restrictions, but travelers will have to continue wearing masks on planes per the federal government's mandate that's extended into January 2022. And a car show in Germany this week is showcasing smart, futuristic, and mostly electric cars. But there is still room for the classics, catering to people who appreciate the days of gas-powered vehicles. NTD Center Thomas reports.
German car makers introducing their latest high-tech vehicles to the public Tuesday at the IAA Mobility Show in Munich. But there's still room for classic cars. It's Motor World's specialty, and it's taken over a whole hall of the show.
Back in those days, they were in part tailor-made and handmade. That's the difference, and that's why people enjoy looking at the historical art of car making.
While manufacturing methods have changed, the allure of classic cars will last into the future.
Today you speak about neoclassics. That means that they are modern cars, but because of their design and because they are limited, there might just be 50 or 100 made. It means that they will be the classics of the future. There are some from McLaren, from Pininfarina, from Ford there is the GT40, which is standing behind me.
This Mercedes 300 SLS from 1957 is on sale for $1.3 million. There are also cars that were used in Hollywood movies. The original Skyline GTR R34 used in the Fast and Furious is on display, but not for sale.
The way it works is that you simply have a high level of respect for the way these cars were made.
Another car in the Motor World collection is this Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow Mulliner Park Ward from 1970. It was owned by Muhammad Ali. The IAA car show runs through September 12th. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And bad weather is bad news for Nigeria's cocoa output. It's likely to fall by at least 12.5% next season as late and heavy rains threaten to damage the main crop. It's according to the president of the country's Cocoa Industry Association. Soraya Ali reports.
Nigeria's cocoa output is being threatened by bad weather. That's according to the president of the country's Cocoa Industry Association, Mufutau Abolawenwa. He told Reuters that Nigeria's cocoa output is likely to fall by at least 12.5% next season. This comes as late and heavy rains may damage the main crop and raise the risk of disease. That's a big problem for Nigeria, which is the world's 5th biggest cocoa grower. However, some farmers are expecting that the main crop will be better than the current 2020 to 2021 mid-crop, which typically runs from April or May to September. Abolawenwa said demand for beans was recovering in Europe, the Americas and Asia as economies reopen amid the global health crisis. He said with demand returning, local inspectors are working with farmers and exporters on bean quality to try to boost the grade of Nigeria's cocoa exports.
That's the latest business updates for today, but you can still catch NTD Evening News with Stephanie Cox. That's at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. For NTD Business, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow.